Alright, let's beat a dead horse for a minute, shall we?
Did I just do that?
Well, definitely with my assistance.
I just moved shit with my mind.
I just keep hearing I.
I just moved shit with my freaking mind!
Aw, man, that's a bit embarrassing. Whether you know the context of Forspoken or not, I think we could all agree that this feels just a little bit off, doesn't it? A character trying to be funny by acknowledging their powers doesn't really mesh in your mind so well, does it? There's something about her tone, her animation, the interjections of that British guy you can hear that gives this feeling of, well, cringiness? This follows right after you violently smoke some monsters with magic, too. And now we've shifted to this comedy scene all of a sudden. The tone feels off, doesn't it? Why is that? Tone in video games is kind of weird, isn't it? Sometimes we can't escape how gamey games end up being, you know? That feeling of gaminess will permeate essentially any title you try to play because it's a video game. You can't escape how things feel, how characters can get hit with a weapon or something and just quip about it. Most games have a lot of variance in their tone, much like how real life is. And then when we add player agency into the mix, things become even more complicated. The big fear is that players will encounter varying tones at different moments that don't mesh well. You know, like the Forspoken thing.
What a shame.
The kind that will conflict or disrespect the player, or the character's intelligence or personality. And yet, we all get surprised when suddenly games writers try to be funny and fail, or try to elicit any feelings other than a singular one which tends to define that title's runtime. It's become a lost art, tone. How you could use tone to enamor the player with your serious elements, get them into character more, make them laugh or cry, to make them think, and maybe even scare the hell out of them. You might think I'm over-exaggerating. Surely only a handful of games and genres could do such a thing, right? Well, that's where you're wrong. Dead wrong.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
From the originators of the modern RTS genre, Westwood brings us the venerable, the ultimate in strategy, Command and Conquer. A series defined for leading the charge in design principles for the burgeoning genre, known for its excellent gameplay, brilliant soundtrack from Frank Klepacki, and its wonderful FMV cutscenes to communicate its story. All three of these elements are a core aspect of the series' identity, but also form the framework for how the tone of the series will form in general. And what is that tone?
When people ask about my position on illegal immigration, I've got two words. Attack dogs. No walls, no permits, just dogs. Attack dogs. It's time people learn that this freedom doesn't come for free. Vote for me if you want to live.
I call it cool but ridiculous, which brings us to the first, and perhaps the most important rule of tone. You have to live it. You cannot hesitate. You must recognize what types of feelings your design choices will be creating, either bolstering them or covering for them at your discretion. For Command & Conquer, they want you to be a badass commander, sending your troops into daring battles and destroying everything in your path, while taking on a menagerie of unique and sometimes crazy foes. But at the same time, that doesn't mean it can't be fun. In fact, that's sort of the whole point of it. Notice those two ideas, being a badass and having fun. Those two feelings don't conflict with each other, do they? In fact, they complement each other. Thus, you can play these games with the awesome rock music in the background, and then in a cutscene have J.K. Simmons give you his campaign speech about how only he can save us from the Red Menace. That rock music communicates that this ain't your granddad's strategy.
What is the actual scale of this map, darling? 1-to-1, sir.
This is Command & Conquer, baby, and we're here to kick butt. With all this in mind, though, it's not like the plots of the world aren't serious. Much the opposite, in fact. Walk into any gaming convention or something, just yell, "Kane lives!" and see how many responses you get. It's a wonderful sign of a community who loves what they've got, and respect it for both its seriousness and its silly moments. Additionally, playing with tone in this way gives designers a greater breadth of creativity to draw from, especially for Command & Conquer, which, because it doesn't take itself that seriously and likes to have fun, you start to see crazy, zany stuff like Yuri. Fucking Yuri, dude. A whole extra faction comprised of Russian psychics. I mean, he's just a joy, as is all the FMV stuff from the series. Oh my god, this guy literally looks like Stalin. I cannot even describe to you how good the casting was. Also, Kane was here the whole time. Kane lives, my brethren. It's so confident about you having fun that they end up killing Yuri by having him time travel back to prehistory and having him get eaten by a dinosaur. Though, of course, not before getting away with that ridiculous line that one would roll their eyes at in any other game.
The entire world and all of its history is mine to command and conquer.
That's why they call it that.
All of this is played totally straight, with only a slight wink at the audience. They want you to get invested because you're enjoying yourself, and you're enjoying the gameplay, enjoying the feeling of being a commander, and enjoying the nonsense of what you're faced with.
You are made of stupid.
It's a riot. It's awesome. And it comes from the root of what makes people play games to begin with. It's just fun, man. It's really fun. But what if you want to have more than just a little bit of fun?
It's Frank. Frank West. Remember that name, because the whole world's gonna know it in 3 days.
Dead Rising is one of Capcom's master classes in design, a zombie survival game based around player freedom in a dense, concentrated locale facing against an endless horde of the undead. You play as ya boy, Frank West, an independent journalist who's covered wars, you know, and has come to the town of Willamette to investigate why it's gone dark. Compared to Command & Conquer, this tone is clearly more serious, right? Yeah, it definitely is. The zombies and their role in the game is played pretty seriously, as is the story in general. Frank is mostly a serious guy, just trying to get the big scoop. But then, what if I just walk into this clothing store here and... Oh my, these stay on in the cutscenes. That's just amazing. Rule number 2. Respect the player. This is a fundamental rule for all video games, tone included. Don't treat your players' actions, choices, and feelings like they don't matter to the experience of playing the game, because that's exactly what they actually are. I put on this stupid shit with the expectation that I would wear it all the time, and guess what? I do. No matter what, and that's all my fault. I brought this nonsense on myself, and that extends not just to the costumes. Frank has a variety of silly weapons and items, all with their own unique attacks and interactions with zombies. Got a pie? Throw it in a zombie's face. Got a silly toy sword? Hit them and it lights up. The same extends to the second game, only with even more silly stuff added to it outside of the story. Combo weapons make all sorts of zany ideas come to life. My favorite is the firework gun that shoots out of a bunch of lead pipes, and the plate launcher. They're just great. All of this doesn't detract from the setting though, it's just played to a more tongue-in-cheek degree, and this is exemplified by the Psychos.
Listen good, partner.
I don't allow vandalism in my store!
Psychos are the bosses of Dead Rising, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Driven mad by the outbreak, they attack with a wide array of weapons and abilities, which at times is outright comical. And yet, despite that, they aren't just there to be silly. Many of them are portrayed as tragic. Normal people who fail to cope with what's happening, and who take out their instability on others. They're silly for sure, but they still mean something. They're still people. Just very much leaning more to the parody side of the game than other characters you might meet.
It wasn't over. Not for me.
All of this makes for a memorable meshing of styles and tones, which at its heart still has the important message about finding the truth of the world no matter how dangerous it is, about helping others despite the risk and doing it not just for fame and money, but because it's the right thing to do, even if it means doing it looking like this. That note about seriousness is important. Can fun, often silly tones still thrive in a game that is, at the same time, taking itself dead serious? Of course it can.
子供の前で親の顔にさっさば叩きつけんのが立花不動産のやり方か。
Yakuza 0, the raddest game ever, is exactly that, along with basically the entire series, I might add. Kiryu Kazuma, the Dragon of Dojima, embarks on countless quests to kick butt in the name of honor and badassitude, jamming out to way past cool soundtracks, and eventually learning the ancient, spiritual art of being immune to bullets. While most people have heard about Yakuza and how cool it is, I don't think that's really what people think of when they think of Yakuza. Instead, they probably think of... Number 3. Know your boundaries. Yakuza isn't scared to let some silly bits slip into their stories, but when it really comes down to it, they know when to have fun and when everyone needs to start making their serious faces. Yakuza 0 in particular is special since it's juggling 3 major tones at the same time. You have the serious Yakuza stuff with Kiryu and Majima, the funny stuff in the sub-stories, and the overarching tone of rampant growth which accompanied the 80s in Japan. And the game melds them all together perfectly. You don't level up with XP, you do it by spending outrageous amounts of cash. Kiryu kicks ass in all sorts of funny ways, but it's never addressed as being funny within the context of the game. So much so that the ludicrous nature of combat and the obscene violence of it all has become basically another part of the game's identity. Remember, Kiryu has never killed anybody. He only beats them senseless, thus making him the most moral Japanese man in history. Not to mention, part of the point of Yakuza is to make you feel like you're really in this entertainment district in Japan, and that comes with its own wild tones as well. The mix of the city buildings juxtaposed with the lights and crowds of people make it feel alive and ripe for adventure. Imagine all the crazy stuff you can and will find, independent of the more pressing main story. Oh, but I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? I just mentioned not addressing your tone a little bit. I was gonna save that for something else.
Ocelots are proud creatures. They prefer to hunt alone.
Metal Gear Solid. Tactical espionage action. I will not insult you by explaining what it is. You already know. Metal Gear loves its silly dialogue, outlandish combat, and stealth mechanics, and of course, breaking the fourth wall. But it's all part of the charm. It's a part of the identity, just like everything else here. Imagine any of these games mentioned here being what they are without those elements, and you'll see just how important these design choices actually are. For Metal Gear, however, the greatest boon for why it's the way it is, aside from Hideo Kojima, is the next tenet of tonal design. Number 4. Never address your tone. You know what I mean. When a game or a film or something can't help but point out to you how funny it is. Insert literally any Rick and Morty joke here if you want an example. MGS is outrageous. We have our super serious nuclear war commentary stuff, dying for your country and redefining information. But at the same time, you end up fighting the following. Let me just get this. Okay. A vampire, a fat man on roller skates, a Native American bodybuilder with a minigun, a Russian man with an obsession for revolvers, a ghost, an obscure Japanese mythology reference, a bee-man, your brother, a psychic who knows you played Symphony of the Night, the former president of the United States of America, a cyborg ninja, the guy who invented sniping, your mom, and of course, and they don't say anything about it. Snake never stops halfway through and asks, man, isn't this weird? Like, dude. Big Boss doesn't bitch out Paramedic for talking about 50s and 60s movies trivia. Doing so would ruin the illusion that the world is just funny like that. It would rip you out of the setting instead of getting you invested in it. Remember, just because the characters are taking it seriously doesn't mean you have to. In fact, you really shouldn't, and instead you should just have fun with it. Not to mention that this is all clearly intentional. You're supposed to think these things are ridiculous. They wouldn't have put it in there if it wasn't the point. At the same time, though, you can still take it seriously like you're intended, since the game blends the silly stuff with serious stuff almost all the time. It trusts that you can laugh at it, but still understand what it's trying to say, thus creating this incredible fusion of tones that gets people invested. You'd be hard-pressed to find a series as beloved as Metal Gear, after all. Unfortunately, some of that subtle meaning I mentioned goes over people's heads. And also sometimes it isn't that subtle because Kojima just can't help himself. If we wanted subtlety, we'd have to find a guy who makes stuff so crazy that he's never hit mainstream. Real cult classic kind of stuff. But who could we turn to for that?
Damn right. I'm an apprentice of the master.
Suda51 is an actual maniac. He's a menace of tonal shifts. I don't even think he realizes how great his stuff is sometimes. For the record, I had originally planned to put Killer 7 here instead of No More Heroes, but then I realized I'd have to spend some time explaining what Killer 7 actually is, and I can't do that.
If you win, I'll let you in on a little secret. How to hit on women with 100% success.
Anyways, No More Heroes follows Travis Touchdown, a total loser with a beam katana, on an adventure to become the top-ranked assassin in the town of Santa Destroy. It's wacky, it's gamey, it's stupid. Travis recharges his katana by basically jerking off, and yes, if you're on the Wii, you have to do that motion yourself to charge it. Travis is literally a parody of a human being. He loves moe anime, professional wrestling, and is desperate to get laid, which he never will. And all of this would be great on its own. It's just so fun when it's combined with the unique visuals, music, and gameplay, but that tone, the character set by all of it, isn't just meant to be funny. It's meant to mean something. Travis is quite literally a parody of anime fans and nerds. He loves the idea of being a badass killer, making a name for himself, but behind the scenes, that's not what it's actually like. The entire game is centered on that dynamic, of how Travis learns that he's really just killing people for literally no reason. There's no glory, no excitement, nothing to learn or gain. Everything is so fake, in fact, that the organization he's competing within is literally a scam by the woman who runs it to con Travis out of all of his entry fee money. You spend all this time working shitty minimum wage jobs to afford the fees just to find out they weren't real. That's amazing. You see how great that is? The funny tone of the game is a cover for its true meaning. You engage with it on multiple levels in part because of that tone. You can have fun with the zany world and characters, and yet at the same time still see the change in Travis as a person throughout the game. You can admire his eventual realization, sympathize with his regrets even as you kill the hell out of more people. The game is called No More Heroes for a reason, after all. All the killing, which in another game would be good or heroic, is shown to really just be pointless, just like everything Travis holds up as being vital to his livelihood. Though, of course, at the same time, that doesn't mean that Travis's livelihood isn't important. In fact, it's still really a celebration of people like Travis in a funny way. It never directly calls the player a loser. Probably. You're not supposed to take it that seriously in reality, but within the context of the game, you need to understand that that's what it's about. The best of Suda's work is like this, by the way, from the Postal Service being government hitmen in the 25th Ward, or his early concepts for Shadows of the Damned, or basically anything in Killer 7. It's what makes Suda Suda. I hope you can see what I mean here with tone, and there's lots more to say about the minute details, but there's another reason why I picked these games out as examples. While they're all great, they do have one thing in common. They all failed to utilize tone later on in their developments. Command & Conquer 4 is itself not that great of a game, and with the addition of aliens and the story becoming more and more complicated, you start to have to actually take the whole thing seriously, which ends up making the fun parts of the setting fade into the background. Dead Rising 3 was a step back in several regards, but it wasn't so bad. It's Dead Rising 4 that was hard to play. The comedy is no longer in the hands of the player. Now it's all Frank. He makes jokes constantly. He can't take anything seriously. He's trying to be funny when Frank or Chuck never really were. It didn't respect the player's initiative to have fun on their own. Instead, it must be forced upon them. Yakuza remains mostly okay, actually, except for Yakuza Like a Dragon, which meshes the seriousness of the game with the comedy a little too much. The boundaries no longer exist, and while it may still be pretty funny, it's throwing away what made the previous game so special. Metal Gear Solid failed by addressing its nonsense. Remember all those bosses I mentioned? Well, guess what? Now we're gonna explain them. It's nanomachines or something. They just had to explain it instead of just letting them be. They worked because they were just accepted as real. They were just a part of the world, not something that needed a Kojima lore dump. And finally, No More Heroes was fun because Suda wanted it to be fun. No More Heroes 2? Well, it wasn't directed by Suda for one, but at the same time, by making a sequel, it defeats the point of the original entirely. It didn't mean anything anymore. Now, it was contractually obligated fun. That is the issue for tone in the modern era. It lacks all of these things. It doesn't know how to justify a comedic tone or a serious tone, so it just does what it wants. Look at any form of modern media and you'll see tone-deaf writing everywhere. It can't live its tone. It has to flip-flop instead of finding a niche. It can't respect the player or viewer. It always has to force feelings on them, or assume the audience is feeling something that they just aren't. It can't set boundaries. It doesn't know how to apply varying tones to different aspects of the design. It can only be one thing at a time before swapping to another, equally unearned idea. It can't help but address itself. It needs to let you know as overtly as possible that it knows this thing is funny or crazy or serious, and then it needs to undercut itself in the same vein by pointing at how they're ruining it. And worst of all, it can't say anything. A funny tone is just a funny tone. A serious one is just serious. The feelings which those tones elicit are essentially non-existent. And for the record, that doesn't mean that games can't change or get better. Metal Gear got Revengeance, which didn't really involve Kojima, but still illustrates most everything I listed here. I have yet to play Yakuza Ishin, but I have heard good things about it. No More Heroes 3 was a return to form for Suda following a long bout of development issues. And as for Dead Rising and Command & Conquer, well, I suppose we could pray? In the end, it comes down to just making sure that you have fun. Fun begets investment, and investment begets greatness. And if you're going to disagree with me, that's fine, but I think we could all agree on one thing here. Just don't be tone deaf.
What a sorry state we're in.